This is perhaps one of the oldest, if not most groan-worthy Jewish jokes. But like any classic quip, it contains deeper wisdom. There's a well-known story about a rabbi who was called upon to settle a dispute between two of his followers. The first man poured out his complaints to the rabbi, and when he finished, the rabbi said, "You're right." Then it was the second one's turn, and when he finished, the rabbi said, "You're also right." The rabbi's wife, who had been listening to the conversation, said incredulously to her husband, "What do you mean you're also right? They can't both be right." The rabbi thought for a few moments and then replied, "You know, my dear, you're right too." On one level, this reveals the pressure on rabbis and other public figures to please everyone. It could also reflect that defining Pacific Northwest desire to avoid conflict. But there is a more subtle and significant insight into the very nature of disagreement and conflict, especially about the things that matter most to us and for which we are most passionate. When opposing sides of an issue feel strongly, come to a debate with good intentions, and believe that their views are valid, more often than not, there is a need to recognize the rightness of both sides, despite our desires for unrealistic closure or artificially neat resolutions. For so many of the defining issues that have torn our polarized polity apart in increasingly troubled and toxic ways, the path of moderation toward the middle is the right way and the best way. It is a place that is often decried and condemned for being without passion or purpose. But it is a place that we need to reclaim because it is a place in which most of us reside, particularly in our current moment, when the extremes suck all the oxygen out of our discourse and often dominate the discussion. It is the moderate middle that can pull us back from the dark and dangerous places for which we seem destined. And it is a willingness to compromise that can recognize the inherent dignity of all and affirm the values and ideals that we all share. Philosophically, the notion of the paradox inspires us to recognize the inevitability of moderation and compromise. Paradoxes are as perplexing and frustrating as they are a genuine reflection of issues. In essence, they teach us that two things can be correct at the same time. The Zen koan asks, "What is the sound of one hand clapping?" In our tradition, Rabbi Akiva taught, all things are foreseen by God, but free will is given. Reflecting on these paradoxes is a good exercise for the mind and soul. They force us to venture beyond our intellect and the shackles of the binary thinking of this or that, either or. They compel us to confront the illusion that the great debates of the day can be resolved with certainty and finality. And Rabbi Akiva's paradox teaches us something about the unique nature of God and the role of humanity, that God's power and human agency can coexist. One of the greatest challenges to faith, and in many ways the entirety of the human experience, is that we must learn to live in the gray. It's a tough place to be as we struggle with uncertainty and contradiction, even and especially with situations that seem to scream out for moral clarity. But living in the gray is as authentic and true as it is challenging. And as with all trials to our faith, recognizing the necessity of living in the gray deepens opportunities for reflection and instills a greater sense of humility. And in that authentic struggle with paradox that leads us to seek moderation, the rubber meets the road in our pursuit of compromise. The eminent philosopher Avishai Margalit wrote a masterwork on good and rotten compromises. He observed, quote, "We should be judged by our compromises more than our ideals and our norms. Ideals may tell us something about what we would like to be, but compromises tell us who we are." A keen insight in that only through knowing who we are can we envision what we would like to be in the future. That is as true for us as individuals as it is for us collectively as Americans. For in so many ways, our founders rooted the legislative texts and structured the balance of powers in the spirit of compromise. They understood well the limits on human attitudes and behavior, and they forged a system that would moderate the extremes of demagogues and radicals while consolidating the broader wisdom of the citizenry to reach resolutions that completely satisfy no one, but ultimately serve the greater good. And much of our American political tradition was founded on Jewish tradition. The rabbis were as much judges as they were teachers, and they understood how vital it is to render judgments that are open to all views and possibilities. The rabbis devised a concept called peshara, translated as compromise. And though they felt that they were agents of a pure and strict deen, a clear pursuit of justice as foundational to our faith, they saw peshara as a critical way of balancing deen, justice, with shalom, wholeness and peace. The rabbis offered a metaphor of two boats approaching a narrow channel or two camels approaching a narrow passage. If both boats or camels try to push through, both will sink or fall. But if one permits the other to entry first, all will thrive and live. Peshara is often preferred because it leaves both parties satisfied, sometimes even in their satisfaction with being dissatisfied. Peshara provides judges with the latitude to assess factors beyond the letter of the law. It ultimately diffuses bitterness while promoting a sense of unity toward the common cause of maintaining a peaceful society. The other core concept emerging from our tradition, one that could provide unique and important insight to our larger world in these trying times, is machloket l'shem shamayim, debates for the sake of heaven. The text from Pirkei Avot teaches every conflict for the sake of heaven is destined to endure. The 16th century commentator Bartonoro adds a needed gloss of clarification, teaching that it is the people that debate for the sake of heaven that will endure and not be lost. Conflict is inevitable. What lies in our hands is how we conduct these disagreements and to what end. As many tongue-in-cheek comments and jokes attest, we Jews are a disputatious people. 2 Jews, 3 opinions. The desert island with 2 Jews and 3 shuls. The one I go to, the one you go to, and the one neither of us will ever step foot in. The entire rabbinic tradition is founded upon argument and debate as the indispensable way to come to a synthesis of wisdom and truth. And the archetypes of this healthy disagreement without demonizing were the sages Hillel and Shammai and the schools that emerged from them. Shammai often took the more stringent position on a subject, and Hillel took the more compassionate. But there are some key ways in which they lived out the notion of debates for the sake of heaven. First, they ate in one another's homes and married one another's children. In essence, they sought to be in one another's presence, to relate to one another as real people and not distant stereotypes. And thus, when they argued, they focused on issues and not on personal attacks. Second, their motivations were not merely to win the contest. They sought a resolution for the common good as their core motivation. Third, they were willing to listen to the other side and admit when they were wrong. For the goal is not ego gratification, but dispensing the truth as God's will. And our tradition cites God directly when these houses would disagree, as a voice from the heavens intoned, Elu ve'elu divrei Elohim chayim. These and those are the words of the living God, that there is value, truth, and even divinity in seemingly opposing positions. Though it was used in a different context decades ago, poll after poll indicates that there is a silent majority of us who are frustrated, sick and tired of the constant conflict stoked by the nasty and vehement minority on the extremes. There is a growing appreciation of the many values, views, and ideals that we share, and the need to validate the ways in which we differ. More than validate, we must celebrate those differences as a potent pathway to deeper insight and broader perspectives, fostering an openness to truths beyond our narrow sight lines and life experience. If we are unwilling to do this for ourselves, then at least we can do it for our children and our grandchildren, holding out a universal hope to bequeath to them a world far better and more reconciled than our own. It is more comforting to choose the mirage of the absolute and certain over the melange of paradox, moderation, and compromise. But as with so much that comprises our humanity, it is precisely the struggle with doubt that makes us stronger. It is the competing claims of conscience that refine our thinking. It is the embrace of complexity that defines us as ethically enlightened creatures, echoing the depth, the mystery, and the eternality of our ultimate source. The mezuzah that adorns our doorpost is as much an opportunity for hidur mitzvah, artistic beautification of a commandment, as it is a reflection of the ideals rooted in the sacred texts that lie within it. It is a symbol of our aspiration to make our home a mikdash me'at, a mini sanctuary, a refuge of love, care, and support for all who enter and reside there. But this common feature, so familiar to all of us, is itself the product of debate and compromise. And it reflected a family squabble that informed our custom down to this day. The famous medieval French commentator Rashi believed that the mezuzah should be affixed vertically as the Sefer Torah appears in the ark. His grandson, Rabbeinu Tam, disagreed, asserting that the mezuzah should be affixed horizontally, like the Torah when it is opened and read on the bima. So, in classic rabbinic fashion, 150 years later, Rabbi Jacob ben Asher split the difference, instituting the diagonal slant inward that we all employ today. And as the rabbis would say, if we can come to such an embracing and affirming understanding with something that is important but not life-changing, how much more should we believe and act in the world on vital issues in the spirit of moderation, nuance, subtlety, humility, and compromise? May we as a people and as a nation enter the coming period of electing our leadership with a commitment to rise above existing contention, divisiveness, and bitterness. May we engage inevitable disagreements for heaven's sake. May we resolve to live with difference and distinctiveness, not as a cause for fear, but as a celebration of the diversity of creation. And may we more clearly see and cherish the values we share, the hopes that bind us, and a vision for the future that secures a world of common good, common purpose, and common blessing. Ken Yehi Ratzon, may this be God's will, and let us say, Amen.